So in this section, we'll be going over how to save and review the error log generated by the plugin, what are some common errors to expect, and how to go about checking for incomplete or mismigrated data. Before we begin, I would like to say that the examples we use are coming from the University of Georgia, and the examples for the types of errors are only a sample. If you have questions about errors or cleanup steps not mentioned in this video or in other guides, please send an email to the ArchivesSpace user group email listserv. We left off last by setting up and starting the migration process. When we look at the Migrator plugin, we will hopefully see that the migration has completed successfully, and we are ready to take a look at everything that went right and wrong. One of the most useful outputs from the migration is the error log, found right here. This will show a detailed report of some of the errors the migrator had while migrating all of the records. And I will show you an example found right here. So this is an example of what the error log might generate at the end of a migration. If we scroll to the very bottom, we get the statistics on what went right and wrong in the process, found here. You'll see that it was pretty successful for most of the items, including our lookup lists, or what ArchiveSpace calls our controlled vocabulary lists. 36 out of 36, that's pretty good. For subjects and names, you will see it says 599 unlinked, 1,749 unlinked. This is because we set our settings last time to not migrate subjects and names that were not linked to resource records. This helps save some time for data cleanup. We were fortunate that all of our accessions and digital objects migrated. Though during our first test migration, this was not the case, but we will go over some potential errors in just a minute. What is strange is that the tool says only 46 out of over 4,500 records migrated. While that does seem alarming, as we go through our ArchiveSpace instance, you will see that all of our resources made it. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure why this statistic behaves this way, but our own review of the data in ArchiveSpace should clear this up. So now, let's do a brief rundown of some of the errors you might encounter. The beginning of all error logs start with conversion errors and warnings. These include mismatches between repositories for accessions and resources, improperly formatted dates, missing links between digital objects and accessions, among others. For these errors, the data still migrated. For instance, if you look at MS769 and the end date before begin date, this error message right here, if we actually go to ArchiveSpace and we go to this particular instance, you'll see that the record still migrated. But you'll notice that the expression of the date is the same as Archivists Toolkit said it was, but the begin date and end date are the same. This is the behavior of the migrator when errors like this occur. It will still transfer the data, but there are certain rules it follows to allow the data to be transferred. If you're interested in learning more about how the rules apply, make sure to check out the migrator's GitHub page. Now let's take a look at the record save errors. These are errors where items could not be migrated for a variety of reasons. From our pretty small list here. Most of them are because users and some of the subjects it was trying to import already existed. We don't need to do anything about these. However, some of the records will result in data not being migrated. Let's take a look at Orbis Cascade's list of errors and talk about just a few of them. Orbis Cascade created this fantastic guide on how to set up and perform a data cleanup review. I highly recommend giving it a look through if you're planning on conducting a migration. For now, let's take a look at some of the sample errors that they give. The first we are familiar with, it being, for instance, invalid date. This can be fixed in ArchiveSpace or Archivists Toolkit. The second also deals with an invalid date range, but using a sequence of digits as opposed to a yearly date. The third is one where two resources have the same EAD ID. ArchiveSpace likes having unique identifiers for all its collections. The migrator has a handy trick that appends a suffix to the ID to make it unique. The collection will still migrate, but you will have to consider creating a new ID for the collection. The following two errors have to deal with duplicate subject terms. The first case is the same error we had in our error log and doesn't need any cleanup. However, if you have the same subject but with different sources, this will cause an error and you'll have to clean this up before migrating. The last set of errors can be pretty difficult to read at first glance, all of this stuff. Our first test migration had a ton of these kinds of errors. Let's take a look at the first one to break it down. It says that this record has had an invalid rule for a name. When we look at the error message, we see an endpoint, an AT identifier, and a status text with an error message. The most important thing here are the AT identifier, which will tell you what resource, accession, or digital object has the error, and the first lines of the status text. You see where it says names-0-rules? Invalid value English. That tells you specifically what is causing the error. For the name, Williams Vera B, the rules field has an invalid value, specifically English. We can go back to Archivists Toolkit and look at the record to verify the error and fix it accordingly. The same applies to the next error message. In this message, we see we are talking about a record with ID 1213. The error message is pointing to instances-0-instance type right here, saying the property is required but was missing. Here we can see that the instance types are required by ArchiveSpace, so we want to go back into Archivists Toolkit to fix that. Since we've gone through some of the errors in the error log, let's finally go to ArchiveSpace and start checking how everything migrated there. When we log into ArchiveSpace instance, keep in mind that if we try to log in using our old Archivists Toolkit usernames, our passwords were reset during the migration, This was done according to our migrator settings we set up before migrating. First, I'm going to double check that all of our repositories, locations, accessions, digital objects, resources, names, and subjects migrated. To check repositories is pretty easy. Just go up to the Select Repository button at the top right, click the drop-down menu, and check that all the repositories migrated. For accessions, we go over to the Browse button at the top left and click Accessions. Now I'm currently looking at all the accession records for Hargrit Library repository. Because we have many repositories, I want to go through each one and add the total number of accessions together. This same procedure is done for resources and digital objects. For subjects, agents, locations, collection management, assessments, events, and classifications, those are all instance-wide numbers, so we don't have to go to each repository to check them. Just click on the field that you want to check and look at the total number at the top. For instance, go to Browse, Subjects. We have 6,280 subjects. After confirming our numbers are correct, let's take a look at some of the sample data. Before you migrate, it is a good idea to compile a list of resources, accessions, and/or digital objects that you know are weird and standard. A small sample will make it easy to look through ArchiveSpace and do deeper dives on the data to make sure it is displaying properly and the data is how you expected it. We'll examine MS 905, the Margaret Mitchell Family Papers. This one is a big collection and has some legacy description practices. We'll go and click on View. From here, we can review all of the top-level information about the collection, such as the extent data, dates, finding aid data, agents, and subjects linked, and the notes in both raw and formatted options. One thing we found that was not apparent was that any notes that contain HTML styling or XML styling, like emphasis tags or external reference tags, sometimes they were not properly formatted. In this case, you can go to the Edit the Record and click on Notes. ArchiveSpace will put in bright red highlights any misformed HTML so they are easy to spot. Besides top-level information, take some time to look at the structure of the finding aid at the top. Look for any missing or oddly formatted series titles, file or item titles, barcodes, and top containers. If you use barcodes, they are attached as a suffix to the top container. Also make sure that items that are supposed to be published or internal only are reflected so in the record. Additionally, take a look at any truncated or missing data in fields. For instance, we applied data in the Component Unique Identifier field in Archivists Toolkit. The migrator took that data and appended it to our series and subseries level titles. Since we didn't want this, we had to go back to our Archivists Toolkit database and clean up weird information that was entered in that field, like barcodes or random gibberish. Other things to keep in mind while examining the data include broken purls or links, which will be copied over without checking whether they work. Items without top containers, but do have barcodes and unique identifiers, will have barcodes assigned as their unique IDs. see the GitHub for that, and general container data and locations issues. Lastly, check your controlled vocabulary lists and see what data can be merged or edited pre-migration. At the top right, System, Manage Controlled Value Lists, list name, all the lists in the controlled vocabularies are shared between repositories. So if you have values that one repository uses but another doesn't, be prepared to see those options in all of your repositories. Let's take a look at the extent types. ArchiveSpace ships with certain default values in these lists, but your migration may add more. When looking at controlled vocabulary lists, keep in mind that at the very right, you have links that say not used or 2,501 related items. These numbers are repository dependent, so if I were to switch to another repository, these numbers may change, except subjects and agents and other lists. Use the related items count to your advantage when cleaning up data. It makes it a lot easier to see what records need to be changed in ArchiveSpace, or if you want to clean them up in Archivists Toolkit. From here, you can delete, merge, or suppress values. To merge a value into another, click the value you want to merge and click Merge. Then choose the value you want it to be merged into. After that, all the related items will be associated with the new value and the old value will be deleted. The last thing that I want to mention is that this is an iterative process. Your first migration probably won't be your last, and that's okay. Cleaning up data can take time, and the migrator helps identify the errors in every migration. As people enter new data into your old Archivist Toolkit, new errors may appear. I recommend that when you are satisfied with the cleanup you and your colleagues have done, assign a cutoff date for entering data into Archivist Toolkit. Use this date as the day you do your final migration to ArchiveSpace, preferably over the weekend. Then, use some time, if you can afford it, to clean up any remaining data in ArchiveSpace and let the staff go at it. Thank you very much.